it was a new model of a partnership where the government is handing out, not developing the projects on its own, the governmental bodies, but basically buying the projects that are readily available on the market. So this project was done as part of this program, and it was built relatively very quickly over a period of, including design and building, over a period of a little bit over 2 years, maybe actually around 2 years. So it was built over this period of 2 years, but basically delivered some 2 or 3 years ago. The initial response as an architect, of course, this area is or was at the time the industrial area of Kranj, so basically not very favored, because the city of Kranj is, as you saw, on the location located on top of the hill, which basically overlooks the confluence of these two small rivers. Sotocje, the word Sotocje means confluence, and on this confluence there was an old tire factory. So basically it was a relatively contaminated industrial area which we had to clean, where basically this Sotocje housing is the first of the projects that are meant to redevelop this entire area of the coastal region of Kranj. No? So it was the first of the factories to be demolished. So basically what we did, our initial response was basically to have the project communicated to both the old city of Kranj, the medieval city which is on top of the hill, and to this kind of, let's say, extreme quality of this river situation. So this is why the 3 buildings are positioned in such a way so as to allow for the maximum number of apartments, not for a certain number of apartments to have an ideal views of the water, but for a maximum amount of apartments. Practically every apartment of the building has the views of the water. That was one decision. The other decision was to basically use the parking area of under the housing as a kind of a cleanup method, because the entire ground had to be dug to the level of -3 meters to remove the soil, and then to replace it with the parking areas, which we today almost don't see, and then to concentrate all the planting, all the large greenery in the area which is basically in between the parkings and the river itself, which is anyway the area which is forbidden to build on because it is prone to flooding. So basically this is a flood proofing of the housing. So those were the kind of technical limits, I would say, of the project, and the technical decisions that had to be made on the project. And then for us the most important decision was not to build the social housing, to try and build the social housing in a kind of situation where basically as many units as possible would have the views of the water, and there would be as much as possible open space per apartment unit, which is not calculated in the social housing rules. No? So basically the open spaces of the apartments are outside of the social housing rules, so therefore the interiors of the buildings had to be built to conform to the social rules of social housing, and the exteriors are something where we could build this idea of a thick facade, where the in-between zone, in between the real facade of the housing, which is done in a relatively very cheap material, and the real cladding or the skin of the building, which is done in this perforated aluminium paneling, is to be used by the inhabitants as their own kind of exterior space. If there is one thing that I would say is really common it's a common interest that we have in the construction processes, in the way the kind of buildings are worked out, in the way that buildings are built technically, not technically in an industrial sense, but technically in a kind of a craftsmanship sense. So I think in a lot of our projects you will see this interest in how you put things together, how you screw things together, how you put one material on top of another. So there's this, I don't want to call it really only an interest in tectonics of architectural construction, no? Which some of the critics say about it. But generally the idea of construction is something that is imminent, I think, to all of our projects. No? So even when you say that you see kind of a characteristics of a style or a characteristics of a language, I think it also has to do with that. With the idea that there is this permanent interest about into how a construction process of a building is visible in the final appearance of the building, or in the final use of the building, in that sense. No? main changes that you see in the project were the kind of issues that related to the economic aspects of the project. So the first solutions had many more. We didn't go for the slabs. Our first solution was not to do the 3 slabs, and even today I think it would have been better to have been able to have more than those 3 slabs. So we were more thinking in terms of kind of houses which had to do with the scale of the large houses of the city rather than the, let's say, large housing projects of the city. So we had more 6 or 7 buildings in this location, but of course we also at some point or very early on had to take into account that the financial limits that are imposed on this kind of housing are relatively radical. So therefore the minimum amount of entrances, the minimum amount of elevators, the minimum amount of staircases led to this kind of changes that you see today, that basically we went in the end in the final solution for 3 slabs. Of course, these slabs are not parallel to each other, but they open up towards the water. They try to open up as much as possible so that all the apartments would have these views towards the water. One thing, and then the other thing, that these communal spaces that happen in between the blocks would have a kind of a dynamic aspect, so that they would not be really very static spaces which are built in parallel or next to the river, but in a sense spaces that also spill over and open towards the river views in one case, and then towards the views of the city on top of the hill in the other case. So these are the main changes. Otherwise, very early on, because we have been working on social housing before, and we have done quite well, most of our housing that we did, actually, housing projects that we did, are built as social housing projects in Slovenia. Only a few of them were commercial projects. So we knew that in social housing projects it is very difficult to control the kind of scenarios of use in the future, for future use of the buildings. So therefore, let's say also part of the response of this elevation that you see today, which is a kind of this perforated elevation which seems to be closed, but in fact is very open and transparent when you look at it from the inside, also had to do with the fact that a lot of this social housing has very small spaces in the units. Therefore, people tend to put a lot of stuff onto the balconies, which you basically have to, in a way, try and hide. Or try to provide space for, you know? So, and because the terrace space is not calculated in the social housing units, therefore this becomes an obvious space which can be an extension of the unit, and therefore a storage space or an outside space of the unit. So all of these things came into the project very early on, because these are the things that we have been dealing throughout our career of building social housing projects. So therefore this is maybe one where we immediately went into the project without having too much to discover, but with knowing what kind of problems we were facing in the other projects we were doing, and trying to basically solve or propose solutions for this kind of problems in this in a new condition.